Well, hello everyone. I am Billy Dees, and welcome to our live stream here today. We're new to this, and I'm not sure how many people are going to come in on the live, and that's fine. If we don't get any, that's fine. But I did want to get this mechanism, as it were, in place because this is something that we might do. I don't know necessarily that doing programs, interviews, and things like that is something that I want to do live. But I feel that a lot of supplemental things to the podcast can be done via live stream. So people like to watch other people live, and it's a good way to get information out about what you're doing, about the medium in general, how you feel about podcasting, how you feel about digital media, things you watch, things you don't watch, things you like, things you don't like. And the nice thing about YouTube in general, when it comes to podcasting, is that any information that you're putting out there in terms of content, you have to keep in mind that YouTube is essentially the second largest search engine out there. So when people are looking for information, a lot of times they just go straight to YouTube and look for the information. They don't even bother with the standard wide search. Now, the one thing here again, this is our first time out. I'm not too thrilled with what I came up with here to do the live stream today. I have here in the studio, I have one system that's set up that's geared up to do podcasts. Then I have another one that's set up to do videos and sound editing. And the podcasting one, I loaded up with OBS and what's the StreamYard. Now, StreamYard is a pretty cool service. I'm just checking it out. I'm not recommending it yet, but anyway, let's say services like it give you the ability to send your live to YouTube and also to Facebook simultaneously. And that's kind of cool. And that's something that I can foresee myself doing. But I can tell you, with getting the OBS set up, getting the checking into the StreamYard and other things, and getting all that, which is essentially the hard part. What turned out to be a stumbling block was getting the camera that I wanted. So with COVID, the high performance streaming cameras are hard to find. And if you do find them, there's a good chance somebody paid retail for them, and now they got them on some website for 2 or 3 times the price, which is enough of is discouraging enough. But what I don't like about that is if you buy it from one of them and it doesn't work, then what do you do? So I'm holding out for this one particular camera in particular. I kicked around the idea of taking one of my production cameras and hooking it up with a capture card, but I don't want to be grabbing stuff all the time and running with it. I want to set up a nice webcam, leave it there, and it's good to go. There's a couple of people here that I want to shout out. The podcast in terms of audio, and that's kind of where I'm going to go with this today in our 15-minute little thing here, is doing very well. I've been on, I was one of the early adopters to podcasting, and Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio. I would have to say between Apple Podcasts and Spotify, a lot of listens come in, and we get listens from all over the world. And that is absolutely fantastic. And I've always made it a priority with things that I'm doing to promote the podcast, that the quality of the audio is always there. I'm a big fan of audio. I'm one of those guys, big speakers, big sound, good microphones. I come from the radio world. And I feel that if you're going to do a podcast, your content, and I've talked about this before, your content should be geared towards the platform that you're on. So if you want to be a YouTuber per se, then you need very visual content. If you want to be a podcaster, then that should be slanted towards audio. And what I've noticed is a lot of people doing is, especially the newcomers now, the people that have just gotten on the bandwagon with, okay, well, podcasts are the thing to do. They're really hot. Let's do one. What happens a lot of times is they do a video very similar to this, or they record a Skype or something, and they just strip the audio off of it and put it up on Anchor or whatever, and that's their podcast. And that's, I don't know, you can give me your opinion on this. To me, that's really not a podcast. When you just repurpose audio in that fashion, that's not really a podcast. If you're going to structure your content for a podcast, it should be something where the production and the content is geared toward listening. And it's okay. You can supplement it with video. And same goes with your video content. If you're making something on YouTube that is very visual, that's fine. And you want to supplement it with audio, that's fine. But here again, always be aware. Yes, Curt just said, audio isn't the same to me. That's correct. Yeah, if you're just repurposing stuff and just throwing it up as a podcast, and a lot of times this audio that's coming in off of these conference services and all that isn't that great to start with, and when it doesn't have the video to support it, just kind of regurgitating it, for lack of a better word, through a podcast platform isn't what podcasting is. So we are primarily, the Billy Dees podcast is essentially an audio-oriented, radio-styled podcast. If you don't know anything about us, we do a lot of interviews. We do a lot of interviews with authors. We do a lot of personal stories. We also do a lot of commentary. We'll do current events, and we'll do other things. We really don't have like a category like true crime. We try to keep it very upbeat, very current event, entertainment, certainly with the authors and some of the other people, the comedians that we have on. So there's a lot of things that you're going to get from week to week if you've never checked out our podcast before. So here again, I do want to, speaking of an international audience from TikTok, I do want to give a shout out to Lania. She is from England, and obviously it's, I don't know what hour of the morning it is there. But she's going to check this out later. I wanted to make sure that I gave her a shout out. And our recent guest, if you check through the playlist here on YouTube, or if you check through the playlist on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, on down the line, our most recent interview was with Lenora. She shares a very, very personal story. And I'll give you a trigger warning. It has to do with trauma and some other stuff, but it is a very, very powerful interview. If you go to YouTube, in the comments section, her YouTube channel and her website is all linked there. She also has a podcast as well, so you might want to check out Lenora. She's also on TikTok, and if you happen to be on TikTok, she's on TikTok at It's a New Dawn #4U. So do check her out. She does some great stuff. I also want to shout out to the fine folks at humoroutcast.com. We do a lot of their interviews for them, and as a matter of fact, Bill Spencer coming up within the next week or two. Uranus is always funny. Yes, it is, isn't it? And from Will 3, this is a novel, Hartley Law. We're going to be interviewing those two individuals very soon, and that will be available right here on the Billy Dees podcast. And also go to humoroutcast.com. Some very talented writers over there. New content posted pretty much every day. They do a lot of satire, a lot of political stuff, and the podcast is also found there. As a matter of fact, you can go to any of their podcasts, not only the ones that we do, but all of their podcasts. Just go to humoroutcast.com, click on the podcast tab, and there you go. So anyway, coming up tonight, I do have a new episode, and the new episode is called Elections Are Now More About Sellable Brands Than Ideas. And I won't give too many spoilers here, but I kind of go through what the strategy is of Republicans and what the strategy is of Democrats, and has been for a long time. I'm going to say since World War II, certainly the 1950s and 60s, the stereotypical conservative, progressive started to take form, and their message and how they sell their quote unquote brand, and not necessarily their candidate or their new ideas, but how they sell their brand is something that I talk about on that podcast. That will premiere later tonight. It will be available on YouTube, Billy Dees podcast on YouTube. That's right where you're watching this. And of course, Billy Dees podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, on down the line. And Yeah, do check it out. If you would like, social media wise, we do have a new Facebook page. I am new to YouTube here, and I'm also new to Facebook as far as the podcast goes. So Billy Dees podcast on Facebook and YouTube. I'm new to both of those. But you can check us out there. And if you would like to tweet me, now Twitter is kind of like my social media home. And yeah, obviously you can tweet me, but I always say you have to be nice. You can disagree, but you just have to be nice. Curt says it's more marketing now than politics, and he is absolutely correct. And the debate tomorrow, we're live today on September 28th. And if everything goes as planned, the debate will be tomorrow night on the 29th between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And there's all this talk now about his taxes and everything, which here again, this is just the latest thing in the news cycle to get everybody all riled up. In terms of substance, is it making a difference in your life? Probably not. And that's kind of one of the things that I'm going to talk about in the podcast today. And tomorrow, the debates really are not debates. They're opportunities for each candidate to go up there and make statements. All right. And that's what they're going to do. They're going to make statements along the lines of the talking points that I talk about in the podcast that's going to debut later tonight. And that's it. It's essentially an infomercial for both of them disguised as a debate. It's really not much of a debate. And they're going to have a lot of writers, give them little jabs and little cutesy things to say, and they're going to have it in their pocket. And at the right time, they're going to pull it out and say it. And the audience is going to laugh, or the audience is going to boo. And this is all part of the show. This is all part of the show. And one of the things that I talk about in the podcast in detail is it's easy to blame the establishment. It's easy to blame politicians and all these other things. But the fact of the matter is that these things go on because we, as the electorate, respond to them. We don't have time or the patience to understand the nuance of a story. Okay, we want a reaction. I hate that idea. I love it. This is my man. This is not my man. I don't like him. I love him. And it's the real issues, unfortunately, are not examined by the public. If we as the public demanded nuance to the issues that these candidates are talking about during the debates, they would give them to us. But that's not. We vote for who we like in terms of ideology, and we watch the news that we like in terms of ideology, and we read the columnists that we like. For those of you that still read, that we agree with. We don't too often listen to somebody that is going to push our buttons, somebody who is going to be opposed to our point of view, and that's the problem. And really, we should be taking both sides in. Because on just about any issue that you can name, there's a lot of good points that both sides have, but they won't acknowledge them to each other. It's all about whataboutisms. It's all about I'm right, you're wrong. It's all about don't bother me with the facts. I've already made up my mind, and that's a cliche. Yeah. Curt just commented on my little comment about reading. Curt, by the way, do check him out too. I'm not exactly, if you want to put in your comments where people can find your podcast, Curt does a lot of spiritual based content. I've known Curt for a long time. Curt and I did a podcast for a number of years called The Sanctuary of Sweet Truth. We were on twice a week, and that was actually a pretty successful podcast. We were on for many years. And obviously, everything runs its course at one time or another. But Curt has I believe it's called Upper Room. Yeah, there we go. Upper Room on Spreaker or iTunes. So, here again, something different, something that whether you're spiritual or not, don't be afraid to sample some new content. And I say that's another thing I want to say about podcasting and digital media. If you are a podcaster, or if you're a blogger or a vlogger or what have you, and your niche is makeup, or your niche is true crime, or your niche is this, don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone and listen to a podcast about movies or whatever. And you would be surprised. It's just like, I wouldn't want to just eat one kind of food all the time. And I wouldn't advise that, and I wouldn't do that in terms of the content I take in. I'll often give genres a try that I don't necessarily like, maybe something I don't know a whole lot about, but it expands you a little bit. It opens you up a little bit. You become more well-rounded. And as far as political things and political ideologies, I would have to say 50-50. I check out a lot of people that I know are going to, I'm not going to agree with. I'm going to listen to people that I know I probably will agree with a lot. But every once in a while, the ones that don't will sometimes move the needle a little bit. And we don't like the needle moved. We don't like the needle moved at all. And that's because we're too rooted in our ideologies. So, anyway, I kind of planned on about 15 minutes here today. And for those of you that did come into the live, I really appreciate you being here. This is the first time out. And as this goes along, I'm going to improve a little bit on how I want to kind of package these lives, what I want to do with them in terms of content. If you're checking this out at a later time through the week, it will be available on YouTube, of course. If you have any ideas, let me know. I don't necessarily want to, I kind of like the podcast to stand as what has been successful for many years now. And I want this channel and other things that I'm doing to support the podcast in terms of content, things like this. Maybe we can talk about software, or what kind of microphones I use, or what kind of stories, what kind of content you'd like me to cover in the future, things of that nature, and some behind the scenes stuff. And that would be great. So if you have any suggestions, please make the comments and I will check them out. And the next time we go live, I'm not sure here again exactly how I'm going to space these out, but just follow me on Twitter at Billy Dees on Twitter, Billy Dees Podcast on YouTube, Billy Dees Podcast on Facebook, and all our announcements and everything will be in those areas of social media. Twitter, especially. Twitter is my social media home. That's where I have a very good fan base, and I have a lot of associates who are also doing digital media. And Curt, thank you very much for stopping in. And those of you that didn't comment, that's fine too. And for those of you who may be checking this out later, absolutely. I'm absolutely thrilled that you are here. Thrilled you're checking out the channel. The new podcast debuts later this evening. By tomorrow, you'll have it available. And again, that one is titled Elections Are Now More About Sellable Brands Than Issues. That's the new podcast for this week. It'll run throughout this week, and then a new one next week. Thank you very much for checking out our live, and I'll be talking to you again very soon.